Under the mellow twilight descending over Denver's skyline, Janelle Thompson stepped out of the East Colfax Community Center. Her sneakers tapped softly against the cracked sidewalk, the rhythm of her walk steady and composed. It was the kind of stride earned through years of pushing forward through noise, through silence, through doors that were slow to open. She carried herself with the quiet power of a woman who knew where she came from, and even more, where she intended to go. At 33, Janelle wasn't just a leader in her community, she was its heartbeat. Her afternoon had been spent in a chalk-dusted classroom teaching leadership to young black teens who, like her once, knew more about survival than opportunity. The back of her hand still bore faint streaks of white, a smear left behind from the message she'd scrawled across the board in big bold letters: "Your voice is your power. Use it." The air outside was crisp with a bite of early October, 43 degrees by the forecast she'd checked that morning, but Janelle welcomed the cold. It cut clean, honest, and it gave her something to push against. She zipped her hoodie halfway up, the gray fabric loose around her frame, worn soft from years of washes and wear. She checked her watch, 6:42 p.m., and smiled. Right on time. This wasn't a detour. It was a mission. Tonight, she wasn't heading home to Ryan with takeout and stories from the community center. Tonight, she was making a quiet stop, the kind that carried history on its back. In 7 days, she and her husband, Ryan Thompson, the same man who now helmed one of the nation's most powerful AI tech firms, would celebrate 10 years of marriage. A decade since that first, electric conversation over a modest dinner in a restaurant that neither of them could really afford back then. A decade since the soft-spoken white guy with a chipped tooth and code on his breath had looked across the table and said, "I think I'm gonna build something big and I want you there with me." That restaurant, the Ivory Tower, wasn't just a place with filet mignon and marble floors. It was the beginning. The scene of the spark. And while Ryan's life had become a whirlwind of boardrooms, investor dinners, and policy roundtables, Janelle never forgot where it all started. That's what tonight was about. She would book a reservation for next Friday. No fanfare. No hints. A surprise. A moment just for the two of them to remember who they were before the headlines and the press conferences. Just Janelle and Ryan. Just them. The walk from East Colfax to downtown Denver took 15 minutes. Janelle's sneakers whispered against the concrete as she passed wine bars with outdoor patios, cyclists in puffy jackets, and couples clutching coffee from corner shops. The city hummed with autumn life. A saxophonist played near Civic Center Park, his notes smooth and blue, rising between the buildings like memory. Janelle cut down Lincoln Street, then across 16th Avenue, the red glow of crosswalk signs flickering against her cheekbones. She glanced up as the towers came into view, glass and steel glowing gold in the dying light. There, nestled among them like a pearl in a concrete shell, was the Ivory Tower. A restaurant known as much for its exclusivity as its cuisine. Janelle had Googled the menu earlier that day. Nothing under $80. Reservations typically booked out 6 weeks in advance. But she wasn't worried. She wasn't trying to dine tonight. She just wanted a name on the list. She just needed a single table. A promise for one meaningful night. The restaurant's exterior was as she remembered: sleek black awnings, gold-etched lettering above the door, and massive windows that spilled warm light onto the sidewalk. Inside, she could see tuxedos. Ball gowns. Crystal. The atmosphere behind that glass sparkled like a snow globe shaken just for the elite. It didn't intimidate her, but it did make her tug at her hoodie, brushing absently at the chalk on her fingers. Janelle wasn't dressed to impress. She wasn't here for a show. This was just logistics. A quick stop. She'd be in and out in 5 minutes. No need to get fancy. She reached the front door. Her reflection stared back from the polished glass, natural curls loose, eyes bright but tired, jeans faded at the knees, hoodie soft and simple. Just Janelle. Just who she'd always been. For a heartbeat, she hesitated. Then she pushed the door open. Warm air enveloped her, immediately scented with lavender, roasted garlic, and the undertone of aged Cabernet. The buzz of laughter and clinking silverware dipped slightly as the heavy door hissed closed behind her. The sound of her sneakers squeaked faintly against the glossy marble, a noise that seemed louder than it was. Her eyes adjusted to the low amber light. Chandeliers hung like galaxies overhead, and the dining room stretched wide in curated opulence. A wall of windows framed Denver's cityscape, and among the pristine white tables, servers moved like whispers, trays balanced like choreography. Janelle walked forward, her head high, toward the central podium where a woman stood stiffly behind a sleek mahogany stand. The maitre d', dressed in an impeccably tailored black suit, watched her approach with a gaze that was already calculating, already cold. But Janelle had come too far, 10 years too far, to let a glance stop her. She offered a smile. Warm. Simple. Human. "Good evening," she said, her voice clear and kind. "I'd like to make a reservation for next Friday night, please. A special occasion." She didn't yet know that her request would shatter the calm surface of the room. That her presence, unannounced and unadorned, would ripple through Denver's elite like a stone cast into still water. Or that, by the time this night ended, the ivory tower would never be the same again. But standing there, chalk on her hands, history in her heart, Janelle only knew one thing. She wasn't just booking a dinner. She was reclaiming a memory. The maitre d's eyes didn't flicker. Not at the warmth in Janelle's voice, not at the mention of a special occasion, not even at the smile that would have melted concrete on any other night. She stood stiffly behind the podium like it was a fortress, her manicured hands resting lightly over the open reservation ledger like it was a sacred text. Her name tag read Celeste, and everything about her radiated precision: slicked back blonde hair, skin flawless and pale, lips the color of crushed rose petals but turned into a tight, neutral line. She didn't return the smile. She didn't look up from the podium for a beat too long. When she finally did, her eyes swept over Janelle the way TSA agents inspect a carry-on that looks off, slow, methodical, looking for the thing that didn't belong. Gray hoodie. No makeup. Sneakers. Dark skin. No designer purse. Chalk on her fingers. A micro-expression flitted across Celeste's face, something caught between contempt and boredom and then vanished behind her practiced facade. "We're fully booked," she said, her voice smooth, clipped, and lacking a shred of empathy. "For the next 2 months." The words dropped with the weight of a steel door slamming shut. Janelle blinked once. She didn't frown. Didn't recoil. Just kept her smile in place, though she did tuck her chalk-dusted fingers into her sleeves. "I understand," she said calmly. "But this is for a special anniversary. Next Friday night. It's where my husband and I had our first date 10 years ago. I was hoping to surprise him. Just something quiet." Celeste tilted her head slightly, like a museum curator observing a piece that didn't fit the collection. Janelle's voice remained steady, but beneath it, a cold ache was beginning to grow. She knew what this was. She'd felt it before in boutique stores, in private lounges, at galas where Ryan was expected, but she was explained. It was never about what she said. It was how she looked when she said it. Celeste didn't blink. "As I said," she repeated, slower this time, like Janelle didn't understand English, "we're fully booked." Behind her, the restaurant buzzed with muted laughter and the clink of crystal. Diners in tailored suits and silk gowns were mid-toast, mid-bite, mid-gossip. Through the glass walls, the world watched her, some curious, others annoyed, a few openly disapproving. But Janelle had faced worse. She took a breath. "I'm not asking for tonight. I'm not even asking for something extravagant. Just a table for 2 off to the side, whatever you've got. I can wait if someone cancels. I can leave my number." Her voice wasn't pleading, it was measured, professional, the kind of tone that could diffuse a boardroom. But in this space, that didn't matter. "Miss," Celeste said, with an icy softness that was more violent than a scream, the ivory tower maintains a particular atmosphere. We prioritize our members and long-standing clients. Walk-ins, she trailed off, gesturing vaguely toward Janelle's sweater like it was a contagion. Janelle's jaw tightened ever so slightly. This wasn't her first time being dismissed in silk gloves. She glanced sideways, aware that people were watching. Some not even bothering to hide it. A woman in a red cocktail dress whispered behind a wine glass. A man with gray temples and a Rolex smirked openly. And then, from behind her, came the sound that changed the rhythm of the room, a booming voice, entitled and impatient. "Celeste," it barked. "Why isn't my table ready yet? I told you I wanted the 2005 Chianti breathing 10 minutes ago." A man strode toward the podium like he owned the entire building. Broad-shouldered. Tanned. Late 50s, with white hair slicked back and a gold chain peeking from under his navy blazer. His voice was a whip crack that made heads turn and servers scramble. Jackson Laird. Janelle didn't recognize him immediately, but his energy was unmistakable: big money, bigger ego. He didn't see Janelle. Not at first. Just walked straight up to the podium, gesturing at Celeste like she was his personal assistant. Celeste's face morphed in a blink. The frost vanished. A smile bloomed, a soft, deferential one, as she leaned toward him. "Mr. Laird," she cooed, "we're just finishing final preparations. Your usual table is being attended to right now." Jackson Laird didn't seem satisfied. His eyes finally landed on Janelle, standing inches away, hands tucked in her sleeves, chin lifted. He looked her over like she was a misplaced coat rack. "What's this?" he muttered, not even attempting discretion. "Who let her in?" The words weren't loud. But they were loud enough. Janelle turned her head, slowly, meeting his gaze. No apology in her eyes. No shame. Just a calm steadiness that made his sneer tighten. "I'm just trying to make a reservation," she said evenly. "Next Friday." Jackson laughed once, sharp and cruel. "This ain't a diner, sweetheart. Try Midtown. I'm sure someone down there's got a table with your name on it." Celeste didn't correct him. Didn't apologize. She looked down at her reservation book and stayed silent. Janelle stepped back, slowly, as the tension coiled. She felt the stares more clearly now. The woman in red was still watching. A man near the bar chuckled into his drink. Somewhere, a server froze mid-pour. And then came the twist of the knife. Jackson leaned closer to Celeste and muttered loud enough to be heard, "This place used to have standards." That was it. No slur. No insult you could quote in a lawsuit. Just 6 words dipped in centuries of disdain. Janelle swallowed the heat in her throat. She wasn't going to raise her voice. Not for them. Not tonight. Her hand slid into her pocket, brushing her phone. She could have ended this all in one call. Ryan was a phone tap away. But she didn't want rescue. She wanted recognition. Instead, she offered Celeste one last look, level, unwavering. "This restaurant means something to us. I thought it might mean something to you too." And with that, she stepped back into the center of the storm, unaware that just around the corner, Ryan Thompson's Bentley was gliding through the city traffic. And everything was about to change. The tension in the air crackled like static on a dry winter day. Janelle remained still, shoulders squared beneath her gray hoodie, as the aftershock of Jackson Laird's sneer rippled through the restaurant. It was a silence with teeth. A hush too thick to be accidental, filled with unsaid things and sideways glances. A few diners turned back to their meals, feigning disinterest but not before letting their eyes linger long enough to cast their silent judgments. Others were less subtle. A woman in emerald green raised her eyebrows dramatically, then leaned in to whisper to her date. A man with a platinum watch glanced up from his scallops, smirked, and shook his head with a knowing chuckle. Janelle could feel it all, the weight of their mockery pressing against her chest, wrapping itself around her lungs like an invisible hand. Her pulse thudded in her ears, but her expression remained composed. She'd learned long ago that dignity wasn't about how you felt. It was about how you carried the weight when the room tried to bury you under it. Celeste, behind the podium, hadn't moved. She no longer looked at Janelle at all, her posture frozen in place like a statue carved from polished stone. The reservation book remained closed, untouched, a vault sealing her intent. Jackson Laird, now fully enjoying his role as the uninvited ringmaster of this humiliation, leaned back slightly and addressed no one in particular. "You show up to a place like this dressed like that," he said, loud enough to carry across at least 3 tables, "you shouldn't be surprised when the answer is no." His eyes darted to Janelle's chalk-dusted jeans and up again to her curls, natural, loose, unstyled. His smirk curled deeper. Janelle met his gaze without blinking. "I'm not asking to eat here tonight," she said, her voice low, firm, and unshaken. "Just trying to make a reservation for next week." Jackson let out a harsh bark of laughter. "Next week, this week, what's the difference? You think you can just waltz in here with dusty jeans and expect red carpet service? This isn't a food bank, darling." A ripple of laughter followed from him, from the man seated beside the bar, from a woman who clapped a manicured hand to her lips in mock shock. Janelle felt the sting of it in her spine. Not just the words but the easy cruelty of their laughter. The group pleasure taken in her degradation. Still, she did not retreat. Her chin lifted a fraction. "I didn't ask for special service," she said, evenly. "Just a table for a personal milestone. That's it." Jackson tilted his head, studying her like a novelty item at an auction. "Milestone, huh?" he echoed. "What, got your first paycheck from a school supply drive?" More chuckles. Janelle exhaled slowly, her hands tightening in her pockets to keep from trembling. The taste of metal crept into her mouth, the taste of humiliation swallowed whole. "I'd like to speak to your manager," she said finally, shifting her gaze from Jackson back to Celeste. The maitre d's smile was still gone, but now her brows twitched with something new, mild annoyance, as if Janelle's refusal to just slink away was the real offense. Without a word, she reached for a discreet earpiece clipped behind her ear, murmured something indistinct, and nodded once. Moments later, a new pair of heels clicked against the marble floor. She arrived in a swirl of perfume and polished authority. Tall, mid-40s, platinum blonde, her black dress sleek and sleeveless with a string of pearls around her neck that probably cost more than Janelle's monthly salary. Her name tag barely necessary read, Manager, Victoria Brenner. "Is there a problem here?" Victoria asked, her tone soft but edged like a paring knife. Celeste stepped aside, motioning toward Janelle with a small, dismissive flick of the hand. This woman was misinformed. "We're fully booked." "She's making a scene." Victoria's eyes swept to Janelle. Her gaze ran from her curls to the gray hoodie to the worn sneakers. Something behind those eyes tightened. Janelle lifted her chin slightly, meeting the manager's gaze with cool clarity. "I'm trying to make a reservation for next Friday. For an anniversary. I've been told you're booked out, but I haven't been given a chance to explain. I'm not dining tonight, just requesting a spot." Victoria's face didn't change. "We do have standards," she said, almost rehearsed. "And tonight's atmosphere has already been disrupted." "By whom?" Janelle asked, her voice sharpening ever so slightly. She already knew the answer. Behind her, Jackson Laird chuckled again and raised his wineglass like he was at a comedy club. "I believe I've been perfectly civil," he chimed. "It's the energy that's off. That's all. That's all." 3 words that landed like a slap. Victoria's gaze darted between Jackson and Janelle, then back again, her diplomatic armor cracking slightly. "We're going to have to ask you to leave, ma'am," she said finally. The words hung in the air like smoke. Janelle's jaw tightened. Her fingers dug into her palms. She didn't cry. Didn't shout. But her voice, when it came, was all iron. Because I asked for a reservation. Because this is not the place for unnecessary drama, Victoria replied, the euphemism sharp as a blade. From his table, Jackson added the final twist. You heard her. Best to head back to wherever you came from. You'll be more comfortable there. Laughter erupted again, sharper this time, less restrained. Janelle could see it in their faces, the pleasure they took in watching someone like her be put in her place. It wasn't even about her anymore. It was a game. And they were winning. The pressure inside Janelle's chest built to a roar. Her skin prickled. Her eyes burned not from tears, but from something deeper. Something ancestral. And then her phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't check it. Not yet. Her breath steadied, her voice iron. I'm not leaving because of you, she said, her eyes locked on Victoria. I'm walking out because this place clearly doesn't deserve what I was offering it. She turned without another word, pushing open the glass door with both hands. The cold night air smacked her cheeks as she stepped back onto the sidewalk, her hoodie flapping in the breeze, her chest hollow with shame she hadn't earned. She didn't see the sleek black Bentley pull up to the curb. Didn't yet know that Ryan Thompson, the man she married, was inside watching her walk away from the place where they'd once begun. But he was. And everything inside the ivory tower was about to be turned upside down. The door of the ivory tower swung closed behind Janelle Thompson with a soft but definitive thud. It might as well have been a gavel striking down on dignity itself. She stood motionless for a moment on the sidewalk, her body still absorbing the humiliation that had just unfolded behind those pristine glass walls. Her breath came in short, white wisps. The October air had turned colder, or maybe it just felt that way against the heat of her anger. She pulled her phone from her pocket, screen aglow. Her thumb hovered over her husband's name, Ryan. She could call him. Could tell him everything. The sneers. The laughter. The rejection. But what would that do now, standing alone under a street lamp, her sneakers planted on concrete while behind her, the wealthy toasted wine in scorn? Instead, she shoved the phone back into her hoodie and turned to walk. But she didn't take a step. A low, smooth engine hum filled the air. The sleek, predatory purr of a Bentley Continental GT as it pulled to a stop at the curb like a jungle cat sensing something wrong in its territory. The deep black vehicle gleamed beneath the streetlights, curves reflecting Denver's skyline in sharp detail. The passenger door clicked open with mechanical elegance. Ryan Thompson stepped out. Janelle froze, her heart skipping once. There he was. All 6 feet of him, dressed in a tailored navy suit that fit him like memory precise, timeless, familiar. His sandy hair was slightly tousled, wind-blown from the brief drive, and his pale blue eyes scanned the sidewalk before locking on her. He hadn't expected to see her here. He had left his investor dinner early, an instinct he couldn't quite explain. Something about the way Janelle had mentioned, offhandedly, that she had one last errand on Colfax. That she'd be home a little late. He'd remembered that the ivory tower was just a few blocks away. And he knew his wife. Her subtle clues were never accidental. He'd meant to surprise her. But what he saw instead made his jaw tighten. Janelle stood like a statue under the streetlight. Her curls a wild halo, her gray hoodie dusted with chalk. Her arms were crossed not in comfort, but defense. She looked like she'd just walked out of a storm. Ryan's stride was long and unhurried as he crossed the pavement toward her. "Jay," he said gently. She turned her head at the sound of his voice. The relief that flickered across her face was real, but so was the pain underneath. "You're early," she said softly, her voice cracking slightly despite herself. "I had a feeling," he replied. He reached for her hand. She hesitated for a breath, then let his fingers close around hers. Her dark skin against his pale fingers, a quiet symbol of the partnership that had built empires and endured wars. The partnership now smeared in chalk and disdain. "You okay?" he asked, voice low. No, she answered honestly. He nodded once, absorbing that truth. Then, still holding her hand, he turned. And they walked back to the ivory tower. Inside, the restaurant had returned to its usual rhythm. Glasses clinked. Laughter fluttered. The elite resumed their curated poses, their haute couture facades. Jackson Laird had rejoined his table by the window and was mid-toast, his voice booming once more. Behind the podium, Celeste had resumed her post, the reservation book open again, flipping pages with well-practiced elegance. None of them saw the door open at first. But they heard it. The sound of designer leather soles striking polished marble. The subtle gasp that swept the foyer. A presence that didn't have to be announced. Ryan Thompson had entered. A few diners recognized him immediately, the mogul who had transformed Denver's tech scene. His face was familiar from Forbes, TED Talks, and Fortune's 40 Under 40. The whisper of his name moved through the dining room like a shifting wind. Ryan didn't acknowledge the stares. His eyes were fixed on Celeste. She looked up and froze. Recognition bloomed across her face, followed by dawning horror. The suit. The face. The power behind the name. Mr. Thompson, she stammered, straightening, her voice dripping with sudden reverence. We weren't expecting you tonight. I'm not here alone, he interrupted, his voice calm, almost soft. But beneath that tone was iron. I'm here to meet my wife. He stepped aside slightly, letting Janelle emerge from his shadow. If Celeste had any blood left in her face, it drained now. Janelle stood tall beside Ryan, her expression unreadable, but her eyes steady. She didn't need to speak, her presence was enough. Celeste opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. I didn't realize that she was my wife. Ryan said, not raising his voice, but making it cut all the same. Or just that she wasn't wearing a $2,000 dress. Behind them, the dining room quieted again. Forks paused. Conversation stalled. Even Jackson Laird lowered his wineglass, frowning as if some sixth sense had alerted him to trouble. I asked to make a reservation, Janelle said evenly, addressing Celeste. You told me you were booked out for 2 months. Celeste's jaw twitched. I was unaware of your connection to Mr. Thompson. Had I known? You didn't need to know, Ryan snapped, his calm cracking. All you needed to know was that she deserved the same courtesy you give anyone else who walks in here. Victoria Brenner, the manager, appeared from the back, drawn by the rising tension. Mr. Thompson, she said quickly, please perhaps we can speak privately. No, Ryan said. We're going to speak right here. In front of everyone who saw this happen. Victoria hesitated. But Ryan's eyes pinned her in place. He turned slightly, lifting Janelle's hand and lacing his fingers with hers. This woman, he said, loud enough for every table to hear, built my life with me. This place mattered to us. Until tonight. When you made it very clear what matters more to you is image over integrity. Silence. Somewhere in the back, a server dropped a spoon. I came to surprise my wife, he continued, and instead, I found her standing outside, humiliated by people who didn't bother to ask her name, just judged her clothes, her skin, her presence. He looked around. Let me be perfectly clear. We won't be dining here. Not now. Not ever. Then he paused. Glanced toward the window table. And if any of you think that kind of treatment is acceptable because it didn't happen to you, ask yourself how long you'd be okay being judged by your worst assumptions. And with that, Ryan turned. Janelle followed. And this time, when the glass doors of the ivory tower swung open, it was the restaurant left in the cold. Ryan Thompson's final words hung in the air like smoke after a controlled detonation. For a long, taut second, the only sound in the ivory tower was the faint hiss of a bottle of champagne being returned to ice. The golden chandeliers overhead, which once cast opulent reflections across the marble floors, now seemed to spotlight the discomfort blooming at every table. No one moved. No one spoke. Ryan's grip on Janelle's hand was firm not in ownership, but in solidarity. A grounding. A promise. Together, they turned toward the doors once more. They had made their point. The judgment, the dismissal, the cruelty, they had dragged it into the light and let it writhe beneath the gaze of the very people who'd silently watched it unfold. Then came the crack. It didn't echo off the walls like a literal sound, it wasn't that kind of noise. It was subtler, deeper. The first fracture in the restaurant's meticulously polished facade. "Wait," a voice called out. Not Ryan. Not Janelle. It came from the corner of the room. A young man stepped forward, hesitantly at first, then with growing urgency. It was Luis, the server who had quietly witnessed Janelle's initial interaction with Celeste. He looked barely 22, his black dress shirt slightly wrinkled, a towel still slung over one shoulder. His eyes flicked nervously between the couple and the staff. Then, with a sudden clarity, he reached up, untied the black apron from his waist, and let it fall to the floor. "I saw what happened," he said, his voice stronger now. She was calm. Respectful. She asked for a reservation politely. She wasn't disruptive. She wasn't out of line. They were. He pointed, unshaking, toward the podium where Celeste still stood like a relic, her face pale, her hands gripping the reservation book as though it might shield her from truth. She tried. And they made a show out of denying her. A soft gasp rippled through the room. Victoria took a step forward. "Luis, I suggest you lower your tone." "I'm done," he said, his voice firm now, his hands trembling slightly but not from fear. "You don't pay enough to pretend this is okay." Then he looked at Janelle directly. "I'm sorry," he said. "Truly." Janelle's lips parted, stunned. She nodded once, a silent thank you that passed like a blessing. And then, as if that small rebellion gave others permission, movement sparked from another table. An older woman, silver-haired, elegant, dressed in a midnight blue gown that shimmered like starlight, rose slowly. Her husband, stooped but dignified, followed her. They made their way to the couple, each step deliberate, drawing the eyes of the entire dining room. "We've eaten here every Friday for 14 years, the woman said, her voice calm and resolute. "We've watched the service change. We've watched the faces change. But tonight, something finally snapped." She turned to Celeste, then to Victoria. "If this is the level of decency you allow, you've lost us." Her husband nodded. "We won't be back," he said simply. "Not after this." And just like that, they turned and left. A shift began to bloom, subtle, at first. A man near the center adjusted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding eye contact with his wife, who stared at him with something between disappointment and disbelief. A young couple at the bar murmured to each other, then stood as well, placing cash on the counter without waiting for a check. Jackson Laird, who had until now remained lounging at his windowside table, crossed his arms and scoffed. "Oh, come on. Now we're canceling people for having standards." His voice was louder now, bluster rising in volume to compensate for the slip in control. Ryan turned back slightly, his blue eyes cool and cutting. "No one's being cancelled," he said. "But your entitlement. That might be." The words landed with more weight than volume. Jackson opened his mouth, then thought better of it. His smirk faltered. A silence settled over the room again, no longer stunned, but ashamed. Margaret, the general manager who had arrived minutes too late and offered platitudes too thin, stepped forward now, her voice measured but weak. "Mr. Thompson, please. Let's discuss this in private." But Ryan shook his head. "No. You made a public spectacle out of my wife. You don't get a private exit." Victoria took a breath, her pearls rising with her chest. "We apologize for the misunderstanding." This was not our intention. Janelle finally spoke, her voice quiet but steely. No, your intention was clear. It's just that your assumptions were wrong. Her gaze swept across the room. How many others have you turned away who didn't have a husband with $1 billion name to walk back in here and make you listen? Silence. Celeste said nothing. Her hand still rested on the reservation book, now useless in her grasp. The pages inside were empty. And so was the credibility of the place she guarded so tightly. Ryan nodded toward the door. Let's go, he said softly. They turned once more. Luis followed them, pausing at the podium only long enough to place his name badge down beside the book, a final act of quiet defiance. As they passed through the lobby, the hush behind them felt permanent, like something essential had cracked and couldn't be repaired. Out on the street again, the cold night didn't sting quite as sharply. The Bentley gleamed quietly at the curb. But Janelle didn't move toward it yet. She looked back at the golden-lit entrance, a fortress of opulence now haunted by its own choices. Ryan looked at her. You okay? I will be, she said. And she meant it. They didn't just walk out of a restaurant that night. They walked out of a system and left its glittering silence behind them like a stage that had lost its audience. Inside the ivory tower, the silence that followed Janelle and Ryan's exit wasn't merely quiet, it was radioactive. Victoria Brenner remained motionless near the podium, her fingers stiff at her sides like a broken metronome. Celeste stood behind her like a statue carved from marble and gilt, eyes wide and staring at the doors that had just closed with the weight of judgment. The room hadn't yet breathed again. Jackson Laird shifted in his leather chair, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive blazer like a man trying to reassert control over the scene, over the narrative, over anything. His voice sliced through the silence, too loud, too forced. Well, he barked, with a snort of derision. That was dramatic. No one laughed. That was new. He cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable for the first time since the evening began. Across the room, several heads turned not toward him, but away. A couple sitting near the bar, earlier engrossed in his performance, now stared into their cocktails like they didn't recognize him. Near the front, a woman in a burgundy gown leaned across her table and whispered, "He's the one who mocked her, right?" Her husband didn't answer. He just nodded stiffly and looked down at his plate. Luis, the young waiter who had earlier quit on the spot, still stood off to the side of the foyer, a silent sentinel to the aftershock. His apron lay in a heap beside the podium, the small gesture now feeling like a seismic crack in the restaurant's elegant shell. Then came another shift, small but resonant. An elderly couple seated near the fireplace stood. They were regulars, known by staff and always seated at table 4. The woman adjusted her shawl with trembling fingers, and her husband, in a blazer that barely held back the stoop of time, took her arm as they approached Victoria. "We won't be returning," the woman said, her voice low but carrying. "You should know that." Victoria blinked. "Mrs. Langford." "We watched what happened," she continued, unmoved by the formality. "And what's worse is that no one stepped in until it was too late. That young woman deserved better." The husband looked pointedly at Celeste. "You never even asked her name." Then they walked out. Slowly. Proudly. The hush deepened. Jackson Laird's bravado sputtered. "Oh, for God's sake. This is ridiculous. So one guy gets his feelings hurt and now we're boycotting." Luis, still nearby, turned toward him, voice calm but cutting. "No, sir. We're realizing you don't speak for all of us anymore." Jackson's jaw worked as if chewing gravel. "I've been dining here for over 10 years. I donate to every city gala. Who are you?" Luis didn't flinch. Someone who saw the truth. And couldn't ignore it. Victoria stepped forward, now desperate to regain control. "Everyone, please, tonight was an unfortunate misunderstanding. We'll be reviewing protocols with the staff." A tall man in a tweed jacket stood from the back of the room. "No, Ms. Brenner. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a policy. An attitude. You can't fix this with a protocol." His wife stood next to him, silent but nodding, her face stony. Another voice chimed in. Then another. In minutes, a chorus of once silent patrons had formed a gentle but unrelenting revolt. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't performative. It was honest. Guests quietly requesting their coats. Couples settling bills early. Some merely walking out with unread menus still open on their table. Celeste stood frozen behind the podium as if physically incapable of movement. Her hand remained on the reservation book. She hadn't flipped a page in minutes. Victoria's voice grew strained, trying to patch the unraveling. "We've been serving Denver's best for over 20 years, she called out. "One incident does not define us." But no one listened. The people who had once begged for reservations were now walking away in a slow stream of silent resistance. The restaurant's curated atmosphere had turned on itself. The chandeliers still sparkled, but the illusion they cast had been shattered. And then one final tremor. A man in a slate-gray suit, mid-30s, clean-shaven, rose from the corner near the wine vault. He walked toward Celeste slowly and placed a business card on the podium. "My firm's hosting a tech summit next quarter," he said. "We were planning to book our client dinner here. 80 guests. You can scratch us off." Celeste didn't move. Victoria flinched. Then he added, quietly, "You made a mistake thinking no one would notice." As he left, the card remained on the podium like a final indictment. By the time the wave of exits slowed, nearly a third of the restaurant had emptied. Servers stood awkwardly between tables, no longer moving with the elegant choreography they'd rehearsed so many times before. Back in the kitchen, murmurs stirred like rising steam. A dishwash station halted. A line cook whispered to another, "You see who she was with? That was Ryan Thompson." "That Ryan Thompson?" "Yep." Word traveled. Staff connected the dots. The mistake wasn't just moral, it was monumental. Victoria stood at the center of it all, watching the once flawless empire she managed slip through her manicured fingers like water. Celeste, still silent, finally turned a page in the reservation book. Not to check a name. Just to do something, anything. Because silence now felt like guilt. And she had nothing left to say. The cool night air wrapped around Janelle Thompson like a blanket of truth. It didn't sting anymore. It simply existed, clean, real, sharp like clarity after a storm. She stood on the sidewalk just beyond the ivory tower, her breath visible in the October air, her gray hoodie tugged slightly tighter around her body, not for warmth, but for grounding. She watched the restaurant behind her in the reflection of the Bentley's polished surface. The towering glass facade that once intimidated her now seemed small. Shallow. A monument to pretense that had cracked under the weight of one woman's presence and another man's silence. And it was done. It was over. But the weight in her chest remained. Ryan stood beside her, one hand on the roof of the Bentley, the other resting gently against her back. He didn't speak. Not yet. He knew better than to fill this silence with words. His eyes were on her face, watching her shoulders rise and fall with the effort of maintaining composure. Janelle stared straight ahead, unmoving. Her voice, when it came, was soft but unflinching. "I wanted to surprise you." "I know," Ryan said quietly. I thought if I brought us back to where it started, it might feel like a celebration." "Not." She didn't finish. Ryan stepped in front of her now, gently placing his hands on her shoulders. "You don't owe me an apology for expecting basic decency," he said. Janelle shook her head, a bitter chuckle escaping. "I wasn't looking for decency. I was looking for memory. For magic. And instead, I got a reminder." "Of what?" he asked. That some places weren't built for people like me. And even after all this time, some of them still aren't ready to change. He didn't interrupt. Janelle looked down at her hands, at the fading chalk stains on her fingers. The marks were faint now, mostly rubbed off by fists clenched too long and too hard. But she saw them for what they were, a badge of purpose, not shame. I spent my day teaching teenagers how to lead, she whispered. How to walk into rooms that weren't designed for them and still command space. And then I get humiliated for doing exactly that. Ryan's eyes narrowed not in confusion, but fury. They don't deserve your presence, let alone your grace, he said, and this time his voice was steel. And if there's a lesson tonight, it's theirs to learn, not yours. A breeze swept down the block, pulling a few leaves loose from the trees. They scattered across the sidewalk like whispers. Janelle tilted her head and looked up at the stars. Denver's sky was clearer than most city skies, and the constellations glimmered above the office towers and rooftop gardens. She inhaled slowly. What now? She asked. Ryan turned toward the Bentley, then paused. We go where we belong. She raised a brow. And where's that? Anywhere that values you the way I do. A small smile played at the corner of her lips, tired but genuine. He opened the passenger door for her. She slipped inside. The leather seat was warm, familiar. Safe. As Ryan slid behind the wheel and started the engine, Janelle looked once more at the ivory tower. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she saw the dining room half full now, the energy stifled and off-kilter. Celeste still behind the podium, flipping a page with dead eyes. Victoria whispering to a man in a blazer who looked thoroughly unimpressed. And Jackson Laird? Still in his seat, staring down at his untouched glass of wine, no longer the king of his domain. The room no longer laughed at his jokes. Janelle let out a long breath. They'll forget this, she murmured. No, Ryan replied. They'll remember it when the article hits. When the clients pull out. When their donors hesitate. It won't be about us, it'll be about them. He glanced over at her. But more importantly, so will Luis. So will the couples who walked out. So will those teens at your center, when you tell them. Janelle leaned her head against the window, watching the city lights blur past as he drove. They won't just hear what happened, she said softly. They'll see that I didn't shrink. Ryan reached over, laced his fingers through hers again. You walked in like you belonged, he said. And walked out like you owned the place. Janelle turned to him. But I don't want to own a place like that. You already own something better, he replied. The truth. The car rolled to a stop at a red light. Outside, a small family sat at a corner cafe, two kids giggling over shared fries, their parents laughing freely. No gowns, no tuxes. No velvet ropes or dress codes. Just joy. Janelle smiled. I know where I want to celebrate our anniversary now. Ryan glanced at her with a spark of amusement. Let me guess, no chandeliers. No chandeliers, she confirmed. Just food that tastes like it was cooked with heart. People who smile with their eyes. Tables where no one judges your clothes before asking your name. He nodded. Then that's where we'll go. The light turned green. The Bentley glided forward, leaving the ivory tower in the rearview mirror. Its glow dimmed as they turned a corner. And just like that, it was behind them. They didn't need its table. They never did. They had each other and a new story. One that began not with candlelight and menus, but with resistance, with dignity, and with a walk-away that meant more than a reservation ever could. 3 weeks later, the air in Denver carried the scent of shifting seasons, autumn pressing gently into the edges of winter. The trees lining the west side were turning, gold spilling across cracked sidewalks and red brick buildings that bore the marks of time and resilience. The cold had sharpened, but tonight, warmth came from a different source. Janelle Thompson stood outside a small building with faded white trim and a hand-painted wooden sign that read, "The Hearth, Pay What You Can Community Kitchen." Her hands were tucked into a wool coat, her curls loose around her shoulders, catching the amber glow of the porch lights. She watched through the large front windows as laughter and movement spilled from inside like music. Families sat elbow to elbow at long, mismatched wooden tables. Children in puffy jackets chased balloons between folding chairs. College kids in hoodies ladled chili into bowls next to a grandmother with a cane and a kind smile. There was no dress code. No podium. No maitre d'. No one asked if you belonged. Ryan stepped up beside her, his tie absent, shirt sleeves rolled just past his forearms. His hair was windswept from the walk from the parking lot, his eyes soft when he looked at her. "This the spot?" he asked. Janelle nodded. 10 years, she said quietly. To the day. They exchanged a look not dramatic, not tearful, just full of history. The kind of connection that didn't need speeches. "Let's go in," she said. Inside, the kitchen smelled of roasted garlic, yeast bread, cinnamon apples. The chatter was constant and unfiltered, voices layered like a quilt. A teenage volunteer waved them to a small corner table near a group celebrating a child's birthday. The boy wore a paper crown and clapped his hands over a slice of chocolate cake as if it were gold. Janelle and Ryan sat down, sliding their chairs in with a soft scrape. Across from them, an elderly man spooned soup carefully between trembling hands. When their eyes met, he offered a toothy smile. "First time here?" he asked. "No," Janelle replied. "But it's the first time we've needed it like this." A young woman appeared at their side with 3 chipped mugs of cider. "Welcome, you too," she said warmly. "Eat as much as you'd like. We've got cornbread coming out in just a few." There was no judgment in her eyes. Just kindness. The kind that doesn't ask for credentials. They said grace not out loud, not religiously, but in a quiet, breath-held way. Grace for the moment. For this table. For each other. As they ate, Janelle let her eyes wander the room. It didn't sparkle. There were no chandeliers or crystal flutes. The water came in old mason jars. But every face reflected light born of ease, of safety. Of being seen without being scrutinized. And then she saw him. Luis. He came through the door in a puffer jacket several sizes too big, cheeks pink from the cold, a wide grin already spreading across his face when he spotted them. "You made it," he said, sliding into the seat beside them. Janelle stood to hug him. It wasn't awkward. It was family. "I wouldn't miss this for the world," he said, setting a small box down on the table. "Also, I brought something." Ryan opened the box carefully. Inside sat a simple framed flyer, an early draft for a youth leadership program called Bridges Forward, supported by the Thompson Foundation. "We got funding," Louise said, voice tinged with disbelief. "Thanks to your connection. But more than that, thanks to what happened that night. You two didn't just stand up for yourselves. You made space for people like me to believe we could do the same." Janelle's eyes welled, but she blinked it back. She smiled, touched the flyer gently. "This is yours," she said. "You stepped up first." Luis nodded. "Maybe. But you showed me why it matters." They ate together after that. Shared stories. Laughed. Watched the birthday boy drop a glob of frosting on his mom's lap and giggle like it was the best punchline in the world. At one point, Janelle leaned into Ryan, her voice barely above a whisper. "Remember what they said back at the ivory tower," she murmured. "We serve a certain clientele." Ryan kissed the top of her head. "Yeah. I remember." She gestured to the room, every table filled with difference, every plate full of food and dignity. "This is our clientele," she said. "This is our kind of place." Across the room, a local journalist with a camera entered quietly. Word had spread about the hearth's growing reputation and about a billionaire couple dining there without press, without fanfare. Just being. Ryan looked over at Janelle, watching her interact with a child who'd brought her a balloon like a gift. The girl's face glowed. So did Janelle's. He knew they'd never go back to the ivory tower. They didn't need to. Because they'd built something stronger beyond glass walls, beyond silver cutlery. A new table. A new standard. One set not by prestige, but by presence. A place where people didn't just eat. They belonged. Some stories end with applause. Others end in silence. But the ones that truly matter, they end with change. Janelle Thompson didn't walk into the ivory tower to make a statement. She walked in to make a reservation. For love. For memory. For something as simple and as powerful as celebrating 10 years of partnership with the man she built a life beside. But what she walked into was a wall of prejudice. She was measured by her skin, not her smile. Dismissed for her clothes, not her character. And yet, she didn't break. She didn't beg. She stood. And when the world tried to push her out, she walked away not in defeat, but in defiance. Not to prove a point, but to protect her dignity. That night didn't just reveal who she was. It revealed who we all are when no one's watching. In that gilded room, some chose silence. Others chose complicity. But one chose to stand. And others followed. And that's where change begins. At the hearth, 3 weeks later, Janelle and Ryan found what they were really looking for, not crystal chandeliers, not fancy plates but warmth. Community. Connection without conditions. So ask yourself this, what kind of table are you setting in your life? Who are you inviting in? Who are you turning away? Because worth isn't worn on your wrist or draped on your shoulders. It lives in how you treat people when no one's there to post it. If this story stirred something in you, leave a comment below. What moment hit hardest? What do you take from Janelle's journey? Subscribe for more stories that don't just entertain but reveal. Until next time, stay kind. Stay bold. And never forget, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do, is stay standing.